Today on Accidental Experts with Bryce Hamilton.
Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, guys. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So we have a guest who's going to be talking to us today about divorcing and helping our kids through this divorce process because it can be so mucky, so messy, so hard. And we have a special guest. Her name is Angelique Foye-Fletcher, and she is a play therapist. And she's going to tell us her tips and tricks of how to help kids navigate divorce. With that, let's get to Angelique.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for us to talk about this. I think having parents go through divorce and having kids can be such a challenging topic.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Especially
think
when it's the holidays time, right?
yes, yeah, so many feelings, like so much. I think there's grief happening too for parents, like losses, and then the kids feeling losses too. So it
Yeah,
can bring a lot of emotion to the table.
absolutely. And they're
Yeah,
all valid, and it's also just understanding how do we process it all, make it a little bit lighter.
yeah. So what do you think parents need to keep in mind when they're going through a divorce?
Really great question. So I would say that first and foremost, parents really need to remember that while their relationship is ending, their roles as parents or co-parents are lifelong, right?
Yeah.
So the way you handle divorce really impacts, and I say that specifically, the way you handle the divorce
Hmm.
really impacts the children's well-being around their
Hmm.
emotional, spiritual, physical, all of that. So in this moment, it's really about parents or now co-parents should prioritize open communication, stability, and emotional safety. So children needing to know that they're loved and not responsible for that separation.
Yeah. I think that can be a hard part because kids look to understand. And so sometimes they'll take ownership of something. They're looking for clues, trying to put pieces together, like, why did this happen? Do you think parents should explain why they're getting divorced to their kids?
You know, it goes back to what you said, Bryce. It's really about the honesty. Kids really respect honesty from parents because they
Hmm.
will create a narrative in their story. With my experience as a registered play therapist, I found with kiddos going through divorce, it's like they always oftentimes say, there's a story in my head about what happened, and usually it's like I'm at fault.
Hmm.
So I think it's important that parents, especially going through whether it's the beginning of separation, being clear that this is happening, honesty is
Hmm.
key and it must be age appropriate.
Yeah.
So you just stick to the basics. It doesn't matter if they're 5 years old or 17 years old. And here's a script I usually like to tell people, right? You say, Mom and Dad won't be living together anymore, but we both love you very much.
Mhm.
Avoid placing blame or discussing adult issues.
Mhm.
Sometimes that gets hard, but being mindful, having grace to reassure your kids that they're not at fault, encouraging them to share their feelings, make space for questions, and be okay if you don't have all the answers. Where's daddy going to live? Where's mommy going to live? You say, I don't know, but thank you for asking.
Mhm. Yeah, we're gonna get that figured out,
We're going
right?
to get that
And when
figured
we,
out, but it's not your fault.
yeah.
We love you very much. That's our
Mhm.
focus.
Yeah. Yeah, in a line, I wonder if you like this line. I've used this with families too, is like mommy and daddy have forgotten how to be friends, right? Like we're gonna work on that part of like we need to be able to be friends to be parents, but it's best if we're not together for that.
Yes, yes. I love that. And, honestly, I like to use a method called bibliotherapy, which is the
Hmm.
use of books, right?
Hmm.
To explain the story of about divorce. And there's plenty of books out there, like Dinosaurs Are Divorce, you know what I mean? That I
Yeah.
read to kiddos, especially from ages 5 to like 8, because they can comprehend through
Hmm.
metaphor and storytelling,
Yeah.
about the story, and then kind of opening that up for questions.
Yeah. Well, and I think, yeah, kids will have questions that you don't have the answer to, which is absolutely okay. And to say, like, we don't know what that's going to look like yet, or we're still
Right.
figuring this out, or we're going to work together to solve this, right? Or come up with a solution, and then we'll let you know what that will
Yeah.
look like to kind of allow the kid to stay out of the middle. Because I think oftentimes that can be a really hard place to
Right.
be for both the kid and the parent. Like, it's hard to shift into these new roles.
Yeah, they're trying to make sense of it all, and
Mhm.
the best way is to be honest, simple, open, and being transparent while still being age appropriate.
Yeah. So, what does co-parenting really mean? I know when we talk about people going through divorce,
Right.
a lot of vernacular around that is co-parenting. And
Hmm.
and so what does that really mean and how do you do that?
Yeah, really great question, Bryce, because in simplest terms, co-parenting means just working together to raise your children even after divorce.
Hmm.
So it requires mutual respect, clear communication, and consistency in rules and routines.
Hmm.
Specifically, I found it very helpful to have shared calendars, right? Using Google Apps or
Hmm.
co-parenting apps like Family Wizard. If there is, as we know, that if there's past domestic violence or abuse or worry about, language and everything like that, Family Wizard has been really great for your Laurie to be on, the GAL, everyone can be on and say, okay. And then can tell you, like, this text feels a little bit tense. Let's change it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we're all clear on the same page of being transparent because it helps people stay organized and focus on what's best for the kids. It's
Hmm.
always for the best interest of the child. It's not about being best friends. Like you said, Bryce, like we weren't good friends with each other, but we're going to be great co-parents together to ensure that you're feeling safe, you know, and just being the best team for your child.
Yeah.
That's what I think co-parenting is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great definition of that. I think it is, yeah, just working together. And really, we're co-parents even when we are married, right? So co-parenting isn't necessarily something, or ideally we are, that would change in that. But I think a lot of families, maybe there's different people playing different roles than when you have two separate
Yes.
households. Then
Right.
you have to be different types of parents because you're doing different responsibilities, maybe than what you did when there
When
was
you're in
the
the same
marriage or when the
household.
relationship was together. Yes. And so I think that can be hard. And I think it's okay to say, like, change is hard to our kids,
Mhm.
right? And just because we're changing doesn't mean that it's worse. I think it's going to be better now, right? Because especially if
Yeah.
there's tension
And yeah.
or fighting or things
Yeah.
like that, of like,
Yeah.
this will help us to have a calmer home. Um, and I think kids do want that. They do understand that piece and a lot of times they feel it, right? When they're at a home that has a lot of tension in it. I think it can be confusing for kids who have parents who don't outwardly fight, right? And so
Yeah.
then they are
Mhm.
confused why this is
Mhm.
happening. Like everything was fine,
Right.
even though the parents know that it wasn't. Do you give any different advice to that situation when the kids haven't seen anything as to a reason why they would separate?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I just think it's really important to just establish that mom and dad, or I'm gonna say mom and dad, let's not make a gender,
Yeah,
but your parents are not living together,
yeah.
right? Because that's just kind of the natural progression and focusing on we are loved, but we love you very much.
Hmm.
Because the most important thing out of that is not so much the why. Of course, they're gonna have their own reason. Like you didn't fight, like I've heard other people and their parents do,
Hmm.
or you guys seem so great together, yada yada. It's the child. The child needs a cue for safety and stability, and that's just through constant reassurance
Hmm.
and focusing on their needs, and saying we're gonna prioritize. Me and your parent is gonna work our do our best to create the structure and consistency for you.
Yeah. I think as parents, we sometimes get pulled into that because we want our kids, like when they ask a question, we want them
You
to
want to give an
understand.
answer, yeah.
Yeah. And so it is hard to just say, like to think to yourself as the parent, like this is an adult issue. Like my kid is not going to
Right.
understand this right now. And it does feel confusing. And maybe it feels
Right.
confusing for me too.
Right.
But the
And
narrative that we're,
normalizing it, yeah.
yeah, that we're going to give is that we're working together to raise this child and that we both love you very much and we're going to do everything we can to support you. So I think, to the parents out there that are going through that, even when your kids kind of ask you a question to kind of pull you into that, it's okay to just say, we're not going to go down that path, right? In your mind to say like, this is the narrative that we're doing. And we can talk about more of this when you're older, right? Of like when you're an adult, we can talk about this if that's something important to you then. But I think, even as a kid whose parents divorced as an adult, I didn't really want to talk about it, right? So in fairness, sometimes, we don't as adults even really want that part, right? Like this is kind of your thing. So how do you think you support your kids through the transition? So we're, changing locations, residences. Sometimes parents move to another state or city. Sometimes they're further away. Sometimes they're still next door. How do we support this transition?
Totally. I think it's going back to that main focus too of like, first, very important to acknowledge and validate the kids' experience and their feelings and saying, I don't have all the answers, right? I want to reassure you and acknowledge, yeah, you're sad about mommy, we're splitting up or whatever. And our role and responsibility is to make sure stability. Stability. So maintaining routines as much as possible. Because divorce is like grief. It is actually grief. It's a loss. It feels like a death, right? And so when I work with caregivers who work with kiddos who have experience, whether it's through divorce or loss, I always say, go back to the routine because that creates a sense of normalcy for that child. And try your best to have that parent remain involved in their lives as much as possible. Sometimes there's some barriers there, whether it's just from internal or external factors, right? But what's within your control for one parent. So I always feel like offer grace, empathy, and patience. Allow and let your kids the ability to express their feelings without fear of judgment or pressure to take sides. So that's when it's very important to kind of involve, especially with the kids between 5 to 11, to be in therapy, play therapy specifically, to help kind of process all the feelings that they have and welcoming that.
Yeah. Well, and it can be hard because I think as a society, we're not always the greatest at talking about feelings, right? So then when we get ourselves into a situation where something's changing that's really big and our kids maybe don't have the ability to express how they're feeling, like they just feel stuck and maybe they're acting out or
The
they're feeling
behavior tells you.
resistant.
Yeah.
Yes, right? To say like we need to support this kid and maybe getting into therapy or seeing the school counselor might be something that would be a helpful resource to help them kind of navigate through this change in our family.
I would say, I love that you said it because another tip I would give for the listeners out there is like, get the school involved too. You don't have to give them all your business, but just give them an alert, a heads up, just a preemptive check-in, right? And saying, hey, there's a change in our family structure coming up, and I just want to just be on high alert that you may notice our child experiencing X, Y, and Z. So just wanted just to give you, if there's a counselor that they trust or somebody you can talk to, just to check in, a teacher that they like, so then they're aware and they're tuned. So
yeah, I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is there anything that you feel like parents should absolutely do or definitely not do in this process?
Definitely do focus on your children's needs and collaborate with the co-parent as best as you can and seek professional help if needed. I even go as far as there's co-parenting therapy. Yep. So that's getting away from the traditional couples therapy, but having a space where it's a agenda, focusing on the children's needs, focusing on boundaries, communication, very short term. That again is going to assist your kid. That's different from mediation, by the way. Mediation is just the logistics, the legal stuff, because as we know, marriage is like a business. But when it comes to divorce, separating mergers and all that kind of stuff, there's still this ongoing conversation that I recommend as like a supplement to supporting the kid's needs. So, because that will help focus on the child. And then having that child have their own space to process. And be open to saying maybe they aren't ready to talk about it. I want to really let people know that too. Like, don't tell like, hey, I want you to talk about the divorce with your therapist. They may not even be ready, but at
Mhm.
least it's a cue and a signal that that is a space when they are ready for that.
Mhm.
What they absolutely should not do, DLNOT, do not, is badmouth your ex in front of your kids. That's what your girlfriends, that's what your friends, when the kids go and visit their parents and you talk with your support person, not in front of the kids.
Mhm.
Don't use them as messengers. Go ahead and tell your mom I did this, and this pickup is at this, because that's confusing for the child and messy. And we
Mhm.
already know feelings are already messy, so you're already adding in another element that they shouldn't be aware of at that point.
Mhm. Mhm.
But offer yourself grace when it happens and then say, I'm sorry, and move on. Put the boundary.
Mhm.
And then and don't involve them in any adult conflicts. Like I said, children should feel free to feel love from both parents and without guilt,
Yeah, I think that's
ultimately.
great. Yeah. Well, and I think the messenger part gets tricky, right? Because you're like, oh, my 10-year-old can
Mhm.
handle telling the other parent X.
Course,
But
developmentally that place, yeah.
yes. Yeah, but it puts them in the middle. And what if they get it wrong? And then there's something that happens and there's a conflict. And so it's best to just communicate directly with the other parent to express that, whatever it is, so that the kid doesn't have to be in that middle place, even if it's something really benign. It's just easier to not
Yeah.
have them have to tell
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
I think, one thing that I see in my practice sometimes is parents will ask the kid, what'd you do at the other parent's house?
Mm,
And I think, there is a place for that, like to say, like, oh, did you have a good time? Is there anything you want to talk about? Right. Like to open the door, but for the kid to feel like they're being interrogated, to have to tell you or try to maybe keep secrets from you or whatever that is, if it creates a negative feeling, then that gets tricky, right? And so I think, it's like opening the door to say like, hey, did you have a good time this weekend? Or how was your homework last night? Or whatever it is, that whatever the dynamic is about when we're transitioning. But letting them know that they could talk to you about anything, but that they're not forced to talk to you about something, that you are a person who wants to know. And if you can keep yourself neutral. Another thing that I think helps families too is to have supportive people that are not their parent. So like, let's say it's aunt or uncle or their best friend's parent, and that you as the parent have talked to them and said, hey, my kids identified you as somebody that they feel comfortable talking to about what our family's going through. Would that be something you would be comfortable with? And if it is, then you can let your kid know, yes, Mrs. So and so or Mr. So and so, or your teacher, whatever it is, it would be happy to be that support person for you, and then set kind of boundaries around that so that there is safety. But obviously, if we need more tools than just listening, then maybe it's also, seeking out that
yeah.
therapeutic relationship
Yeah.
to give some more
Tap
support.
into the village.
Yes, right? Yeah, I mean, I think we can't, whether we're married or not married to the person that we had a kid with, we need a village for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about the holidays coming up, and this can be
Mhm.
so tricky, especially with newly divorced families, but sometimes with families that have been divorced for a while.
Mhm.
Family holidays can bring up a lot of emotions. So, what suggestions do you have on how to handle holidays?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's kind of even the same tip for just like when you want to stay active and take care of your own needs, right? And it's plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead, right?
Hmm.
Being able to communicate clearly about schedules. Because again, thinking about the kid coming up with their own sense of normalcy. I need to know, am I going to celebrate as basic as who am I celebrating Christmas with?
Hmm.
Who am I going to celebrate Thanksgiving or Yom Kippur and all those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
Wanda, being able to say, okay, I know, the co-parents communicating together, whether through app, whether through Google Share Calendar, even sharing the kid, like, hey, remember, we transition on Wednesdays to your dad's house, and for Christmas this year, you're going to be with them, right? So
Hmm.
planning ahead, being intentional about that, as well
Yeah.
as facilitating and creating joyful moments when it's your time with the child, right? So whether that means alternating holidays or sharing time, because again, you have to remember that the holidays are about your kids, not maintaining traditions at all costs.
Hmm.
That's really hard, right? Especially again with the loss and grief.
Hmm.
But if you know yourself, or those know they know themselves to be like, have my emotions already run high because I have to think about money, stress,
Hmm.
a work project at home, dealing with as elderly parent, all those kind of things, then maybe this is a good time to consider starting a new tradition to create maybe a more fresh, positive memory for your child. Right? Hey, we used to do Elf on the Shelf. You don't have to bring it up, but like I'll just gonna give an example. If you used to do Elf on the Shelf with that parent in the house, and now, it just feels different. Maybe you can ask the kid, what would you like to do? Let them get
Hmm.
involved. Create. Let's go look at lights together, you know? And acknowledge when they're like, I really miss doing Elf on the Shelf. And it's like, that's okay. We can welcome that. You can bring it with you for when you go to dad's house, hide it there, and then you hide it at my house, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it's just
Yeah.
really focusing on that.
What feels good for the kid. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And we can get our needs met as an adult, right, through other ways, right?
Right.
So we can keep traditions, when our kid's not with us on a particular holiday, we can
Sure.
do those things, or we can make new traditions. I think there's so many options, but in that, especially in the beginning, can be so hard to
Correct.
transition because it's what feels like another loss that you have.
Right. Right. And some people want to get over it. They want to replace, like,
Hmm.
let's just replace it and forget about all the tradition. Then that in itself is just really dismissive and validating, and
Yeah.
makes even the divorce process, because it's ongoing. So it's not just a clear cut, right? So that, just like I said, that's that focus on making sure the child has the opportunity to have joyful moments,
Yes. Absolutely. With
and
both
planning
parents.
ahead
Yeah.
with both
Yeah.
parents, whatever
Yeah.
that looks like, letting go of the
Yeah.
need to control what
Yes.
happens at the other house.
Yes, which is a really hard part, right? To let go of that wanting to be in charge. Okay, so what do you want parents to take away from this conversation? Because we've kind of downloaded a lot of different great information.
Yeah.
What do you want them to remember?
The first things first is I acknowledge the fact that divorce is hard,
Mhm.
and your kids' well-being depends on how you handle it. Be intentional about creating peaceful, cooperative environment for them. Prioritize their needs, communication, empathy, and remember that even in this difficult moment, it's just a moment in time. You want to look for sometimes a temporary relief. Just understand that you have the power to create resilience and fostering love in the family. It just looks different,
Mhm.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
And at times you're not going to feel okay, and that's okay too. But look at the focus of making the priority of your kids' emotional well-being
Mhm.
as the new normal in this journey of post-divorce.
Yeah. Which can be so challenging. And so I think, sometimes for parents, they need their own support person or therapist to talk through too, as they're navigating through this. And there's no fault in that. I think having a unbiased third party can be really helpful to giving you good feedback and helping you kind of set yourself back up for
Yeah.
success, right?
Yeah.
To find a path and journey,
Mhm.
and so important for our kids too, for us to also take care of ourselves.
Yeah. I love what you said there. Like, the intentional self-care could be just as listening to this podcast, reading,
Mhm.
you know, crying, spending time in nature, being with friends, being intentional about your own breaks, being okay with not being okay, but then
Mhm.
and choosing to kind of cope in a healthy way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
that's all welcome. So it's just not skipping over, like, because it's not an easy decision either sometimes to get to that place, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like
Yeah.
we're having a hard time maintaining a friendship that feels safe for one another.
Yeah.
And we have kids, but we are co-CEOs in their life.
Yeah.
And we have the business of making sure that we've created assertive, healthy, or sorry, modeling healthy behavior, assertive communication styles, and empathy and kindness. And so that's the priority of it. And that means modeling that to our children now in a different
Mhm.
space.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your insight on this topic. I know that this will help a lot of people and has been really valuable.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate being on the
Absolutely.
podcast.
Thanks again, Angelique. That was all really helpful information. I'm taking away from this conversation to put our kids first and to keep it simple. I think those are two really important pieces from this conversation that we had. I hope you're taking away something valuable from our conversation as well. I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please rate and subscribe to our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And also keep the emails coming with topic suggestions for future shows to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.